We begin with the COP27 climate conference in Egypt, where negotiators have reached an historic deal. Billions of dollars will go to poor nations to help them cope with the effects of climate change. The damage fund for some of the world's most at-risk nations will partially compensate them for the expected impact of climate change. But negotiations over a larger deal are still ongoing due to some nations, particularly those rich with fossil fuels, blocking efforts to reduce emissions further. CBC's international climate correspondent Susan Ormiston is at COP27, and she joins us from Egypt with the latest. Thanks for joining us, Susan. Let's talk about what's significant about the agreement, such as it is, that was reached at Sharm el-Sheikh.
Well, actually, the negotiations have concluded. Most of the delegates are on their way home. The conference center is closing. And really, we did get an historic agreement here because this is something that poor nations have been asking for, demanding for years. They were blocked in this idea of compensation for severe effects of climate change. And they broke through this week in Sharm el-Sheikh, coming up with a commitment to fund this idea of those who suffer the most from climate change will get some compensation for those who are contributing to it through carbon emissions, countries like Canada and others. But it is going to take some time, at least a year, to figure out how this funding mechanism will work. But we heard a lot from smaller countries, island nations, who were very pleased that finally their demands and their concerns about how they deal with these extreme weather and climate conditions have finally been listened to in a forum like this, with over 190 countries signing on. Essentially, they're saying, okay, we accept that there is severe consequences of climate change, and we accept responsibility for some of it.
Susan, yesterday you were telling us about some of the emotions surrounding the negotiations. What was it like through the night as they worked to settle on this deal?
It was an extraordinary scene at the conference center last night. Every couple of hours, we were told that there would be a draft final text and that they would all go into this large room and, sort of vote and formalize this text. And it kept getting delayed, and negotiators were running from room to room. Others were, slumped in their chairs, half sleeping, many media the same. It went all night, John, all night until about 4 this morning, when they called everybody into the plenary and said, we have a consensus, an agreement on the basic text of this entire conference, which includes this loss and damage fund. That was what many people were looking for, and so it was considered, that part of it anyway, a success. As I said, it will take some time to figure out who will receive these funds and who will actually pay for them.
As you say, Susan, an historic deal as far as it goes, but some went home disappointed. Who did and why?
Well, there was an issue of not enough attention paid to reducing carbon emissions in this agreement. And the European Union, Canada, some other nations were very disappointed that there wasn't language in this year's COP decisions agreements that would encourage and really indicate to countries that they had to work harder to bring down those emissions. The thinking was, you will never have enough money to pay for loss and damage for all the climate effects that we're seeing now. The real solution is to get it at its source, to have less emissions, less effect on the climate, and that there wasn't enough emphasis in this agreement to do that. Canada was quite aggressive on that point earlier in the evening from our environment minister, but that text did not end up being strengthened in this agreement. The other thing that what many people were looking for was to include in this agreement a phase out or a phase down of oil and gas. There already is a phase down rather, of coal, and that's underway. They wanted to push that further to oil and gas. That was rejected. It never made the final text. Many of the oil-producing countries, such as Saudi, we're told, were saying that's a red line and we won't agree to that in the text. So this is all work for next COP, which is in the Emirates next year, same time, and this work will continue. But they did break through an agreement that at times looked like it was on life support, John.
Susan, thanks for all your work on this. CBC's Susan Ormiston live in Egypt.